I watched my husband, Marcus Vance, sign the $50 million contract selling the company built entirely on my secret source code. He turned with a sneer, handing me a hidden divorce petition and declaring I would be bankrupt within 1 month without him. He had no idea I had already copyrighted the core algorithm under my own name. The empire he just proudly sold was about to become my absolute property. Hello to the wonderful audience of Violet Revenge stories. Sadly, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely no budget to operate. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can cover their living expenses and continue creating more thrilling stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the direct PayPal link provided in the description or pinned comment below. Thank you so much for your continuous love and support. My name is Camilla Green, and I am 32 years old. To anyone looking from the outside, my life appeared to be a picture of comfortable, quiet domesticity. I spent my days working silently in the background at Lumina Tech Solutions, the rapidly growing tech company that my husband Marcus proudly claimed as his exclusive genius invention. Every magazine interview and every tech blog feature painted him as a solitary visionary who built an empire from scratch. I let him have that narrative, choosing to be the supportive wife who managed the mundane daily operations while he basked in the glory. The reality of my invisible existence was never more painfully obvious than at a lavish corporate networking party we attended in downtown Seattle. The venue was packed with elite investors, industry giants, and wealthy entrepreneurs. I stood quietly beside Marcus, holding a glass of sparkling water, offering a perfectly rehearsed supportive smile as he held court among a group of highly influential venture capitalists. One of the investors, an older man with a sharp, calculating gaze, turned his attention to me and asked politely about my specific role at Lumina. Before I could even formulate a proper response, Marcus let out a loud, condescending laugh that echoed over the background music. "Oh, Camila," he said, his voice carrying clearly so that everyone in our immediate circle could hear. "She is strictly in charge of aesthetics. She picked out the lovely ergonomic chairs for our office and makes sure the coffee machine is always fully stocked. Honestly, she is entirely too soft and emotional. She would never survive a single day in the harsh, cutthroat world of real business." The investors chuckled in unison, giving me polite but utterly dismissive nods, before turning their attention back to Marcus and his grand visions. I kept my face perfectly still, swallowing the sharp, bitter taste of public humiliation. I accepted the insult in absolute silence, but my mind violently replayed the harsh truth of our past. I remembered the days when I had a highly promising career in advanced system design, a path paved with prestigious job offers and massive potential. I willingly walked away from all of it to build the very foundation of his company from our early, incredibly difficult days. Back when Lumina was nothing but a failing idea in a cramped, freezing apartment, I was the one mapping out the complex software architecture. I was the one staying awake for 48 hours straight, typing thousands of lines of code and fixing the fatal system bugs that he could not even begin to comprehend. I sacrificed my own brilliant future so he could stand in the spotlight, and his public mockery was my ultimate reward. The definitive turning point in my life arrived late one evening. A few weeks after that awful party, the office was entirely empty and eerily silent, bathed only in the cold glow of streetlights filtering through the massive glass windows. I had stayed behind late to organize a massive pile of administrative paperwork and clean Marcus's chaotic, cluttered desk. He was a terribly disorganized man, constantly leaving highly sensitive physical documents scattered everywhere. As I was sorting through a stack of thick legal folders, a sleek, unmarked black drive caught my eye. It was securely plugged into a hidden secondary port on his private desktop tower. Driven by a sudden, intense, and unexplainable instinct, I sat down in his leather chair and accessed the drive. Since I was the original architect of the entire company network, I knew every single backdoor in his system. It took me less than 3 minutes to bypass the weak, pathetic security barrier he had set up. What I found inside that drive completely froze the blood in my veins. There was a single, heavily encrypted folder, plainly titled Exit Project. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the directory. The folder contained hundreds of extensive emails, financial spreadsheets, and official legal drafts detailing Marcus's ongoing, highly secretive negotiations. He was actively preparing to sell Lumina Tech Solutions to a massive global tech conglomerate for an astronomical sum of money. The sheer scale of the betrayal was staggering, but the business deal was not what made my heart stop beating. Tucked neatly alongside the final corporate sale agreements was a fully drafted, officially stamped divorce petition. The dates on the documents made his sinister timeline perfectly clear. He was planning to hand me those divorce papers the exact same week the massive acquisition money cleared into his private offshore accounts. Digging deeper into the files, I opened the attached legal documents. There was a meticulously drafted brief from his personal lawyers outlining a deeply hidden trigger clause in our old prenuptial agreement. When we first got married, I had blindly signed a standard document he claimed was just a simple formality to protect his meager savings at the time. Now, looking at the screen, I saw his true, horrifying intent. The newly drafted legal papers explicitly utilized that old clause to ensure that upon our sudden divorce, I would receive exactly 0% of the company profits. He had engineered the entire legal structure so perfectly that I would be forced to walk away with absolutely nothing to my name. Sitting entirely alone in the dark, silent office, the crushing, suffocating weight of reality finally settled over me. The man I had deeply loved, the man I had sacrificed my entire youth and professional career for, had never actually seen me as a true partner. I was never his equal. I was merely a stepping stone, a convenient, free labor source he utilized to climb to the very top of the industry. He had deliberately drained my talent to build his massive tech empire and was now fully prepared to discard me into the absolute gutter without a single second thought or an ounce of remorse. The profound, shattering betrayal did not make me break down and cry. I did not shed a single tear for the death of my marriage. Instead, a chilling, deeply calculated clarity washed over my entire mind. Marcus genuinely believed I was just the girl who picked out the office furniture. He was absolutely convinced I was far too weak to survive without his protection and wealth. He was about to find out exactly how ruthless the woman who secretly built his entire world could truly be. The sun rose the following morning just as it always did, casting a pale light over our perfectly curated kitchen. I stood at the marble counter at exactly 6 o'clock, grinding the expensive imported coffee beans Marcus demanded every single day. My hands did not shake. My breathing was perfectly even. When he finally walked into the room, adjusting his silk tie, I handed him his steaming mug with the exact same passive smile I had worn for the past 5 years. He took a sip without thanking me and immediately launched into one of his usual arrogant lectures. "You really need to start paying attention to our household expenses. Camila," he said, tapping his expensive watch, "you spent almost $400 on groceries last week. You have absolutely no concept of wealth management. If I let you handle the real finances, we would be living on the street within a month. It takes a brilliant, disciplined mind to build and maintain capital, something you clearly lack." I nodded slowly, absorbing his condescension without a single word of protest. "You are absolutely right. Marcus, I will be much more careful from now on." By 10 o'clock that morning, I was sitting in a run-down, dimly lit diner situated over 20 miles away from the gleaming glass towers of the Seattle Tech District. The air smelled of old grease and cheap bleach, a perfect location where absolutely no one from Marcus's elite circle would ever set foot. Across the sticky laminate table sat my oldest and fiercest friend, Elena Rostova. She was a deeply feared, incredibly sharp intellectual property lawyer who destroyed corporate thieves for a living. I slid my encrypted laptop across the table along with a thick stack of printed documents I had extracted from Marcus's hidden drive. Elena adjusted her glasses and began to read. For almost 45 minutes, The only sound between us was the rustling of paper and the clicking of her manicured nails against the keyboard. I watched her dark eyes narrow as she dug through the digital archives I had meticulously preserved. "This is flawless, Camilla," Elena finally whispered, her voice laced with a dangerous kind of awe. "I am looking at the original source code, completely intact, the digital fingerprints, the embedded timestamps from over 6 years ago, the unique architectural syntax. It all overwhelmingly proves that you are the sole, undisputed author of the core algorithm that runs Lumina Tech Solutions. Marcus did not write a single line of this." "I know," I replied coldly, "but look at the legal folder. Look at what he is using to sell it." Elena opened the file containing the corporate sale agreements. Her sharp eyes scanned the pages until she suddenly froze. Her jaw tightened as she pulled up a specific scanned document dated exactly 2 years ago. She turned the screen toward me. "Camilla, look at this intellectual property transfer agreement," she said, her tone dropping to a deadly serious pitch. "It states that you willingly surrendered all rights to the software architecture to Marcus for the grand sum of $1. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It looked remarkably similar to my handwriting, but the loops were slightly too rigid, the pressure entirely wrong. "I never signed that," I stated flatly, a cold wave of pure, concentrated fury washing over me. "He forged my signature. He actually committed a federal crime to steal my life's work." Elena leaned back in the creaky diner booth, a terrifying, predatory smile spreading across her face. "A forgery? Oh, Marcus just handed us the absolute perfect weapon. We could drag him into federal court today and completely destroy his precious acquisition." "No," I said instantly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Exposing him right now is too easy. If we blow the whistle today, the corporate buyers will just back out, and Marcus will try to bury me in endless, exhausting litigation using the company funds. I do not just want to stop him. I want to let him think he has won everything. I want him to reach the absolute peak of his arrogance before I pull the ground out from under him." Elena nodded slowly, her eyes gleaming with dark approval. "So, what is the play?" "We patent the real, perfected algorithm," I instructed. "The code Marcus is currently selling is actually an older, highly unstable version. I never gave him the final, optimized updates. We are going to file a brand new, airtight patent for the true software architecture today." Elena immediately opened a secure legal portal on her device. Working with lethal efficiency, we legally established a brand new, entirely independent holding company registered solely under my name within 3 hours. Elena officially submitted the massive, comprehensive patent applications, locking down the genuine algorithm so tightly that absolutely no one, especially not Marcus, could ever touch it. Returning to the Lumina office later that afternoon, I executed the most critical phase of my silent retaliation. Sitting at my unremarkable desk in the corner, I accessed the central development servers, using my deep foundational knowledge of the system architecture. I began a massive, untraceable data migration. I spent the next 4 hours quietly extracting every single original design file, every piece of critical documentation, and every line of my time-stamped code, transferring it all to a highly encrypted, remote secure drive that only I could access. But I did not just leave the servers empty. That would trigger an immediate alarm. Instead, I carefully planted thousands of lines of dummy code. I created perfectly disguised, completely worthless files that looked exactly like the real architecture, but functioned as nothing more than a hollow shell. Marcus and his mediocre development team were far too incompetent to notice the difference until it was far too late. When I finally returned to our massive, empty house that evening, Marcus was already sitting in the living room, pouring himself a glass of $3,000 whiskey. He looked at my tired face and smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You know, Camilla," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity, "I have been thinking about your future. Once this big corporate acquisition goes through, my life is going to become extremely fast-paced and demanding. You are going to be left with a lot of free time." Since you completely lack any real ambition or drive to succeed in the corporate world, maybe you should look into getting a simple part-time job. Maybe stocking shelves at the local supermarket. It would give you something simple to do, something more on your intellectual level. I looked at the man who was actively planning to leave me completely destitute while selling my stolen genius for $50 million. I felt no sorrow. I felt absolutely no heartbreak. I simply looked at him, knowing that I currently held the remote detonator to his entire existence in my pocket. That is a very interesting suggestion. Marcus, I replied, smiling incredibly softly as I walked out of the room. I will definitely be exploring some new career opportunities very soon. The official day of the corporate acquisition finally arrived, bringing with it an electric, suffocating tension. To celebrate his massive impending payday, Marcus rented out the grand ballroom of the most luxurious, obscenely expensive hotel in the entire city. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the massive hall was flooded with flashing camera lights, towering crystal chandeliers, and an endless flow of vintage champagne. The room buzzed with the frantic energy of elite tech executives and wealthy socialites, all gathered to witness the crowning of Seattle's newest tech king. I stood quietly near a towering floral arrangement, wearing a simple, elegant black dress, watching the chaotic spectacle unfold. Marcus stood on the grand marble stage, holding a gold-rimmed glass high in the air. The room fell into an eager silence as he began his triumphant speech. They told me building a revolutionary software platform from absolutely nothing was impossible, Marcus declared, his voice booming through the heavy acoustic speakers. They said the market was entirely too saturated, but I knew the pure brilliance of my vision. I spent thousands of sleepless hours writing every single line of that architecture, sacrificing everything to bring Lumina to life. This victory belongs entirely to my unyielding dedication. The crowd erupted into thunderous, roaring applause. He soaked in their admiration, his chest puffed out with absolute pride. Throughout his entire 10-minute speech, he did not glance in my direction even once. He completely ignored the woman who had actually bled for those thousands of sleepless hours. Just as the applause began to fade, a heavy hush fell over the massive entrance. Julian Hayes, the legendary billionaire investor who was purchasing Lumina Tech Solutions, strode into the ballroom. He moved with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who owned half the city. An army of aggressive press photographers swarmed around him as he approached the stage. Julian stepped up, flashing a practiced, predatory smile, and firmly shook Marcus's hand. The camera flashes blinded the room, immortalizing the exact moment Marcus believed he had conquered the entire world. The final corporate transfer documents were waiting on a velvet-draped table, ready to be signed in exactly 15 minutes. Marcus stepped off the stage, his face flushed with pure adrenaline and unchecked arrogance. He caught my eye across the crowded room. His triumphant smile instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated sneer. He aggressively grabbed my arm, his fingers digging sharply into my skin, and forcefully dragged me out of the crowded ballroom into a deserted, dimly lit service hallway. The heavy acoustic doors swung shut, instantly cutting off the loud party music. Marcus dropped my arm as if touching me physically disgusted him. He aggressively unbuttoned his custom suit jacket and reached into his inner pocket. "The pathetic charade ends right now. Camilla," he hissed, his voice dripping with absolute venom. He pulled out a thick, heavily folded stack of legal documents and shoved them violently against my chest. "These are the official divorce papers. My lawyers have already filed everything with the state court. That ironclad prenuptial agreement you were stupid enough to sign means you are getting absolutely 0% of this $50 million deal. You are completely cut off." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of expensive champagne and bitter cruelty. "I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning. Pack your cheap clothes and leave. You are nothing without my wealth. You are going to be completely bankrupt and forgotten within 30 days. He stood there, breathing heavily, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. He fully expected me to fall to my knees. He expected me to cry, to beg, to scream about fairness and love. He wanted to savor my complete and utter destruction right before he walked out to sign his massive contract. I did not shed a single tear. I did not even blink, moving with a terrifying, absolute calmness. I reached out and took the thick stack of papers from his hands. I grabbed the solid gold pen resting in his front breast pocket. I turned my back to him, pressed the heavy divorce petition flat against the cold hallway wall, and quickly flipped to the final page. Without a single second of hesitation, I signed my name perfectly on the dotted line. I turned back around and shoved the signed documents hard against his chest. Marcus stumbled backward, his eyes wide with profound, staggering confusion. His jaw physically dropped. He looked at my crisp signature, then back up at my perfectly composed face, completely unable to process why I was not violently sobbing on the floor. I stepped directly into his personal space. Tilting my head slightly, I looked him dead in the eyes and offered him a chilling, razor-sharp smile. "Thank you, Marcus," I whispered softly, making sure every single syllable landed with absolute precision. "Thank you so much for legally finalizing our divorce right before your massive business transaction officially closed," before his brain could even begin to comprehend the terrifying implication of my words. I turned on my heel. I pushed the heavy acoustic doors open and strode confidently straight back into the blinding lights of the main ballroom. I completely ignored the crowd of wealthy investors and frantic journalists. I reached into my elegant evening bag and pulled out a thick, heavily sealed legal envelope, keeping my eyes locked dead ahead. I marched straight toward the velvet table where billionaire Julian Hayes was currently unscrewing his pen. I walked with absolute purpose toward the stage. The heavy velvet carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I navigated through the dense sea of wealthy investors and elite socialites. The crystal chandeliers cast a blinding white light over the grand ballroom. Julian Hayes stood at the center mahogany table holding his gold pen. I stepped directly into his line of sight and placed the thick sealed envelope flat on the table right over the final signature line of his acquisition contract. He looked up, his sharp billionaire eyes locking onto mine with intense curiosity. "I strongly advise you to read the contents of that envelope before you make a $50 million mistake," I said, my voice completely steady. He broke the heavy wax seal and pulled out the legal injunction. As his eyes rapidly scanned the text, the polite corporate smile completely vanished from his face. I calmly informed him that the software architecture he was about to purchase was built on stolen source code. I told him the documents in his hands were a federal injunction officially halting any transfer of intellectual property. The grand ballroom, previously buzzing with high society chatter, suddenly fell into a dead silence. Julian dropped his gold pen, letting it clatter loudly against the wooden table. He raised his hand high into the air, instantly signaling his massive legal team to halt every single procedure. He turned his imposing figure toward the hallway entrance just as Marcus rushed back into the room. Marcus had a smug grin on his face, fully expecting to see the finalized contract. Instead, he saw Julian holding the injunction and staring at him with a terrifying, cold rage. "What is the exact meaning of this?" Julian demanded, his booming voice echoing off the high acoustic walls. "Why are you attempting to sell me a fraudulent technological asset that is currently under a severe federal lockdown?" Marcus froze entirely. The color drained completely from his face as he looked from the furious billionaire to me, and finally to the legal papers, before Marcus could formulate a single pathetic lie. The heavy main doors of the ballroom swung open. My brilliant lawyer, Elena Rostova, marched into the silent hall, accompanied by 4 towering corporate security officers wearing tailored dark suits. Her sharp heels clicked loudly against the polished marble floor, cutting through the heavy tension like a knife. She walked straight past the confused investors and frantic press members. Stopping directly in front of Marcus, she held a separate, incredibly thick stack of legal filings. With a lethal smile, she formally served him with a federal lawsuit. "Marcus Vance," Elena announced loudly so the entire room could hear. "You are officially served for massive corporate fraud, grand intellectual property theft, and the malicious forgery of a legal signature. These documents detail exactly how you falsified transfer documents exactly 2 years ago to steal the core software architecture. Panic completely consumed Marcus. Heavy drops of sweat formed rapidly on his forehead. He frantically looked around at the hundreds of wealthy investors and journalists who were furiously typing on their phones, recording every single second of his spectacular public destruction. Desperation clawed deeply at his throat. He pointed a shaking finger at me and began to scream hysterically. "She is lying!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "She is just my unstable, deeply emotional, soon-to-be ex-wife throwing a massive hysterical tantrum because I just handed her divorce papers. She is completely technologically illiterate. She is a bitter homemaker who does not know the first thing about complex software architecture or basic system coding." I did not waste a single breath arguing with a drowning man. The presentation screen behind the stage was currently displaying the central login dashboard for the entire company network. I walked calmly past Marcus, completely ignoring his frantic screaming. I stepped up to the main control podium, placed my hands firmly on the illuminated master keyboard, and began to type. My fingers flew across the keys with absolute precision. The wealthy investors watched in stunned fascination as complex lines of deep system code rapidly cascaded down the massive 60-foot screen. Marcus tried to lunge forward to physically stop me, but two of the corporate security officers immediately stepped forward and blocked his path, forcing him to stand there and watch his own execution. I easily accessed the absolute foundational root directory of the entire company network. I typed in the ultimate creator override command, a hidden security sequence I had embedded into the very framework of the system over 6 years ago. With one final, decisive keystroke, I executed a complete global system lockout, instantly and permanently revoking every single administrative privilege Marcus held within the company servers. A loud electronic confirmation chime echoed through the silent ballroom. The complex green code on the massive screen suddenly cleared, instantly replaced by a glaring red access denied warning aimed directly at Marcus. Then the entire screen shifted, in huge, undeniable white letters. The central system proudly displayed the absolute truth to the world. The screen clearly listed my full legal name as the absolute supreme administrator, the sole foundational architect, and the exclusive owner of the entire digital infrastructure. The deep system timestamps displayed next to my name proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the code belonged entirely to me. A massive wave of shocked gasps swept rapidly through the crowd of elite tech executives. The digital evidence was completely irrefutable. I turned slowly away from the wooden podium and looked down at Marcus. He was completely shattered, staring up at the giant digital screen with empty, totally defeated eyes. His entire fraudulent empire had just been burned to the absolute ground. Julian Hayes let out a deep, booming laugh that completely shattered the remaining tension in the enormous room. He looked at the massive digital screen, looked down at the devastated Marcus, and then turned his sharp gaze back to me. His eyes were shining with intense respect for the brilliant move I had just executed. Without a single word of hesitation, Julian picked up the original $50 million acquisition contract from the mahogany table. In one swift motion, he tore the heavy legal document perfectly in half, letting the ripped pieces flutter uselessly to the marble floor. He stepped right over the shredded paper, completely dismissing the ruined man. Julian walked toward me and extended his hand directly to me. "I have absolutely zero interest in buying a stolen shell of a company from a proven fraud," Julian declared, his voice carrying absolute authority across the room. "However, I am extremely interested in doing business with a true visionary. I want to publicly offer to purchase the genuine, legally patented software license directly from your newly established independent company. And because I recognize the sheer brilliance of the actual creator standing before me, I will pay you exactly $100 million to close this deal right now." Exactly 6 months after that explosive night in the grand ballroom, I stood in the bright morning sunlight, proudly cutting the heavy silver ribbon at the massive glass entrance of my brand new corporate headquarters. I officially launched Vertex Innovations, a towering, fiercely independent tech company built directly from the massive $100 million capital I secured through my historic, completely upfront deal with Julian Hayes. The sleek, ultra-modern building was located in the very heart of the Seattle Tech District, occupying an entire city block. It was a glaring, undeniable monument to my absolute rebirth. I had permanently traded the dark, silent corners of my previous miserable life for a sprawling executive corner office. The room was flooded with bright, warm, natural light, and a heavy brass plaque bearing my own name was proudly bolted to the solid mahogany door. I was no longer the silent shadow. I was the absolute master of my own domain. I thrived spectacularly in my new role as the chief executive officer, stripped entirely of the suffocating, heavy weight of my manipulative ex-husband. My brilliant engineering mind was finally allowed to expand to its maximum potential. I spent my long, incredibly fulfilling days actively recruiting the sharpest, most innovative young talents from across the entire country. I specifically sought out the quiet, brilliant minds that arrogant leaders usually ignored. Unlike the toxic, deeply ego-driven corporate environment I had suffered through during my 20s, I meticulously built Vertex Innovations on a foundational culture of absolute respect, fierce integrity, and true creative freedom. We heavily rewarded the quiet software engineers, the invisible system architects, and the fiercely dedicated designers who actually did the heavy lifting. I personally ensured that absolutely no one in my entire massive corporation would ever feel like a disposable, unappreciated stepping stone. While my new technological empire rapidly ascended to the very top of the global industry, the man who once publicly mocked my ambition was completely buried under the crushing, suffocating rubble of his own colossal arrogance. Marcus was rapidly and violently pushed into absolute, undeniable personal bankruptcy. He was drowning under millions of dollars of insurmountable legal fees stemming directly from the massive federal forgery and corporate fraud lawsuits that my brilliant lawyer Elena was relentlessly pursuing against him. His once pristine, carefully manufactured reputation was entirely shattered into a million unfixable pieces. He was permanently, officially blacklisted by every single major investment firm and corporate board, completely exiled from the Seattle technology sector. The grand mansion he once paraded me around in was forcefully foreclosed on by the massive banking institutions. Not a single wealthy venture capitalist would even answer his desperate phone calls, let alone trust him with a single dollar of their investment money. Occasionally, my highly secure private mobile phone would light up with pathetic, rambling voicemails from him. Through the digital static, I could hear the sheer, unadulterated desperation and raw panic in his constantly cracking voice. He would literally beg me to drop the heavy federal lawsuits, pleading for mercy and crying out for a completely unearned second chance. He constantly tried to manipulate me one last pathetic time, cowardly blaming his horrific, calculated betrayal on the immense, crushing stress of the corporate tech world. He claimed he just lost his way, and still loved me. I would listen with a cold, blank expression for exactly 10 seconds before firmly pressing the permanent delete button, entirely erasing his whining voice from my life without a single ounce of hesitation. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt zero lingering attachment or sorrow for a weak, terribly insecure man who had actively tried to legally and financially erase my entire existence. Sitting entirely alone in my expansive executive suite later that evening, looking out over the glittering, vibrant skyline of the bustling city, I spent a long, quiet time reflecting on the invisible, insidious trap I had almost died in. For so many long, exhausting years, I had allowed myself to blindly believe a deeply flawed, incredibly dangerous societal narrative. Society quietly but aggressively programs so many truly brilliant women to instinctively shrink themselves, to purposely dim their own shining, powerful lights just to protect the fragile, incredibly weak ego of the man standing right next to them. We are constantly taught that our silent, unrewarded sacrifice is a noble act of pure love, when in reality, it is nothing but a slow, suffocating surrender of our own immense personal power. I finally understood, with absolute crystal clarity, That absolute, uncompromising financial and intellectual independence was not just a nice luxury to dream about. It was the absolute single most valuable asset a woman could ever possess in her entire lifetime. I had completely reclaimed my stolen genius. I owned my massive fortune, and I made a silent vow that I would never make myself small for any person ever again. The grand lobby of Vertex Innovations was buzzing with an electric, undeniable energy. Today was the official day of our very first massive product launch, a monumental event that would firmly establish my new company as the absolute leader in the global technology sector. Journalists from every major tech publication were gathered near the sleek reception desk, waiting eagerly for the morning presentation to begin. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a heavy gray Seattle rainstorm was brewing, casting dark shadows over the city streets, but inside, everything was perfectly illuminated and flawlessly executed. I stood near the central presentation stage, wearing a sharp-tailored suit, reviewing the final launch sequence with my brilliant lead engineers. Suddenly, a harsh, chaotic commotion erupted near the main entrance. I turned around and saw a frantic figure violently pushing his way past the outer security checkpoint. It was Marcus. For a brief second, I barely recognized the man who had once stood on a grand hotel stage boasting about his $50 million empire. He looked completely shattered. His clothes were heavily wrinkled, stained, and entirely soaked from the heavy rain outside. His face was unshaven, deeply haggard, and his dark eyes carried the wild, frantic look of a completely desperate animal. He had somehow slipped through the heavy revolving doors, while a large group of wealthy investors was entering the building. "Camilla!" he screamed, his raw, cracking voice tearing violently through the sophisticated hum of the bustling lobby. "You ruined my entire life. You completely destroyed me. You stole my legacy and took absolutely everything that rightfully belonged to me." The entire lobby fell dead silent. Dozens of journalists immediately turned their cameras toward the chaotic scene, recording every single second of the dramatic confrontation. Two towering corporate security guards rushed forward immediately to tackle him to the floor, but I simply raised my right hand, instantly halting them in their tracks. I did not need anyone to protect me from this pathetic ghost of my past. I stepped slowly and deliberately off the presentation platform. My heels clicked with absolute, terrifying authority against the polished marble floor. I walked right up to him, entirely unbothered by his frantic, aggressive posture. "You will lower your voice immediately while you are standing inside my building," I commanded, my voice completely cold and entirely devoid of any emotion. The sheer, uncompromising authority in my tone made him flinch physically, as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth to scream again, but the words completely failed him. I looked directly at his shaking hands and his sunken chest, feeling the absolute power of my own hard-earned position. "I did not steal anything from you, Marcus," I stated clearly, ensuring that every single person in the massive lobby could hear the absolute truth. "I simply stopped letting you steal from me. You completely destroyed your own life the exact moment you foolishly believed I was entirely too weak and far too submissive to ever fight back against your endless manipulation." The undeniable reality of my words hit him like a massive physical blow. The last remaining shred of his completely fabricated ego, completely shattered right there in the middle of my gleaming lobby. His knees literally buckled beneath his weight, and he collapsed heavily onto the cold marble floor, completely oblivious to the hundreds of cameras flashing relentlessly around him. Huge, heavy tears streamed down his unshaven face, mixing with the rain soaking his collar. "I knew," he sobbed violently, his voice cracking into a pathetic, miserable whimper. "I always knew you were the brilliant one. From the very first day in that freezing, terrible apartment, I knew your mind was infinitely better than mine. I lived every single day in sheer, absolute terror that you would eventually wake up, realize your own true worth, and completely surpass me. I tried to crush you and keep you small before you could ever leave me behind." I stared down at the weeping, utterly broken man on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity, no lingering anger, and zero sorrow. I felt nothing but complete and absolute liberation. The heavy chains of my past were permanently broken. Your paralyzing fear of my true potential is exactly what cost you absolutely everything, I replied, my voice echoing clearly and decisively in the silent hall. You tried to keep me locked in a small, suffocating box because you were entirely too weak to stand next to a truly powerful woman. I will never, ever lower my true value for you, or for any other man, ever again. I turned my head slightly toward my security team and gave a single, dismissive nod. The towering guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing Marcus tightly by his arms. They hoisted him forcefully off the marble floor and dragged his sobbing, completely defeated body straight toward the heavy glass exit doors. They shoved him roughly out into the freezing, relentless downpour, leaving him completely alone in the storm. I did not waste a single second watching him walk away into the gray city. I simply turned my back to the rain outside, walking confidently back toward my cheering, fiercely loyal team to officially celebrate my brilliant, absolute victory. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen to my complete story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are currently listening from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found my journey of revenge and ultimate freedom inspiring, please consider helping our channel with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code directly on your screen or by clicking the secure PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our incredibly hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue creating even more amazing stories for you.